canvas of the tent. Wind howled through the towering pines. Inside, Mark and Sarah huddled closer, seeking warmth against the chill of the storm. They were alone, or so they thought, nestled deep in the heart of Redwood National Park. The trip was meant to be a romantic escape, a celebration of their anniversary. The raging storm did little to dampen their spirits. They were in love, and the wilderness was their sanctuary.
I'm glad we came.
Mark stoked the campfire, coaxing the damp wood back to life. The flames flickered, casting dancing shadows on the tent walls. Sarah snuggled closer, her head resting on his chest. They shared a thermos of hot chocolate, the sweet aroma mingling with the earthy scent of the forest. The storm raged on, a symphony of nature's fury. But inside the tent there was only warmth, love, and the comforting sound of each other's heartbeat.
Me too. Just you and me and the whole forest to ourselves.
He leaned down, kissing her forehead. For a moment, the storm outside faded away. There was only the two of them, lost in their own world. But the wilderness held secrets, dark and deadly, hidden beneath its serene facade. Unbeknownst to the young couple, a pair of eyes watched them from the shadows, their malevolent gaze piercing the veil of rain and darkness. The campground killer was lurking, and tonight he had found his prey. Deep in the woods, hidden from the reach of the storm, a figure moved with an unsettling grace. The forest, thick with ancient trees and tangled underbrush, seemed to part for him, as if recognizing a kindred spirit in the darkness. He was tall and gaunt, his features obscured by the darkness of the night and the hood pulled low over his head. The shadows clung to him like a second skin, making him almost a part of the night itself. The campground killer, they called him. A name whispered in fear around campfires, a legend that had grown with each retelling. A phantom, a whisper in the darkness, preying on unsuspecting campers seeking solace in nature's embrace. They came to the woods for peace, for a break from the chaos of their lives, never knowing the true danger that lurked just beyond the firelight. His legend had haunted these woods for years, each victim adding another layer of fear to his grim reputation. The trees themselves seemed to remember, their branches heavy with the weight of untold stories and unspoken horrors. He carried with him an arsenal of crude but deadly weapons, tools of his trade, each one chosen for its ability to inflict maximum pain and terror. A rusty hunting knife, its blade honed to a razor's edge. The rust was a testament to its age, but the sharpness of the blade spoke of meticulous care. A length of rope, thick and strong, capable of silencing the most desperate screams. It was a simple tool, but in his hands it became an instrument of terror. He moved with a practiced ease, a predator stalking its prey, his senses heightened by years of living on the edge of civilization. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig was a signal, a message from the forest that he alone could decipher. The storm was his ally, masking his presence, muffling the sounds of his approach. The wind howled through the trees, the rain pounded the earth, and he moved through it all like a ghost. Tonight the scent of wood smoke and the faint glow of a campfire drew him in. The firelight flickered, casting long shadows that danced and twisted, creating a scene of eerie beauty. He had been tracking the couple for hours, his patience as cold and unforgiving as the rain that lashed his face. They were oblivious to his presence, lost in their own world, unaware of the danger that crept ever closer. He moved closer, drawn by their laughter, their love a stark contrast to the darkness that consumed his soul. Their joy was a beacon, a light that he was determined to snuff out. He paused at the edge of the campsite, hidden among the trees, his eyes gleaming with a chilling intensity. He could see them clearly now, their faces illuminated by the fire, their expressions carefree and unguarded. The campground killer savored the anticipation, the fear that would soon be his to command. He thrived on it, drawing strength from the terror he inspired. He was the author of nightmares, the bringer of death, and tonight the storm would be his symphony of terror. The wind howled, the rain fell in torrents, and he moved forward, ready to write the next chapter in his dark, twisted tale. The first scream ripped through the night, sharp and sudden, like a knife tearing through the fabric of their peaceful bubble. It was a sound that seemed to come from the depths of a nightmare, echoing through the dense forest and sending shivers down their spines. Sarah bolted upright, her heart pounding against her ribs. She could feel the adrenaline surging through her veins, her mind racing to make sense of the terrifying sound that had shattered the silence of the night. Mark was instantly alert, his hand instinctively reaching for the hunting knife he kept tucked beneath his sleeping bag. His eyes darted around the tent, searching for any sign of danger, his muscles tensed and ready to spring into action.
What was that? Sarah's voice trembled, barely above a whisper, as she clutched the blanket tightly around her.
Mark strained to listen, his senses on high alert. Every rustle of the leaves, every creak of the branches seemed amplified in the oppressive darkness. The wind howled through the trees, masking any other sounds. It was as if the forest itself was alive, whispering secrets and hiding threats in its shadows.
Probably just an animal. Mark tried to reassure himself, but the unease in his voice betrayed his true feelings.
He moved to the tent flap, peering out into the darkness. The rain was relentless, a curtain of water that made it nearly impossible to see anything beyond a few feet. The storm raged on, rain blurring his vision. The cold droplets stung his face, and he had to squint to make out any shapes in the gloom. He could see nothing but the swaying trees and the relentless downpour. The forest seemed to be a living entity, its branches reaching out like skeletal fingers.
Stay here. Mark's voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. He needed to investigate, but he couldn't risk Sarah's safety.
He grabbed his flashlight and unzipped the tent, stepping out into the raging storm. The wind immediately tore at his clothes, and the cold air hit him like a wall. The wind whipping at his clothes. He could feel the chills seeping into his bones, but he pressed on, determined to find the source of the scream. He swept the beam of his flashlight across the campsite, searching for any sign of movement, anything out of place. The light cut through the darkness, revealing only the familiar shapes of their gear and the surrounding trees. The woods were alive with the sounds of the storm, but beneath it all, a sense of dread gnawed at his gut. It was as if the forest was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. He called out, his voice swallowed by the wind. The storm seemed to mock his efforts, its howling drowning out his words.
Hello? Is anyone out there? His voice was tinged with desperation, a plea for any sign of life in the oppressive darkness.
Only silence answered him, a silence that seemed to hum with a hidden menace. The forest was a void, swallowing his words and offering nothing in return. A twig snapped behind him, close to the tent. The sound was sharp and clear, cutting through the noise of the storm like a warning. Mark whirled around, his heart leaping into his throat. His mind raced, trying to process the sudden noise and what it could mean. He fumbled for his knife, his blood turning to ice as a figure emerged from the darkness. A dark silhouette against the backdrop of the storm. The figure moved slowly, deliberately, and Mark's grip tightened on the knife, ready for whatever was to come. The figure lunged, a blur of motion in the flickering light of the campfire. The night was supposed to be a peaceful retreat, a break from the chaos of everyday life. But in an instant it had turned into a nightmare. Mark barely had time to register the glint of metal before a searing pain ripped through his arm. The shock of the attack left him momentarily paralyzed, his mind struggling to catch up with the reality of the situation. He cried out, stumbling back as the figure pressed its attack, wielding the hunting knife with a terrifying ferocity. The campfire's light danced wildly, casting eerie shadows that seemed to come alive with the violence of the struggle. Mark raised his arm to defend himself, the flimsy flashlight offering little protection against the onslaught. The beam of light wavered, illuminating the twisted features of his assailant for a brief, horrifying moment. The attacker was a whirlwind of violence, fueled by a darkness that chilled Mark to his core. Each slash and thrust of the knife seemed to carry with it a malevolent intent, a desire to inflict maximum pain and suffering. He caught a glimpse of wild eyes, blazing with a terrifying intensity, and in that instant he knew. Those eyes were not just filled with rage, they were filled with a cold, calculated malice. This was no random attack. This was a premeditated assault, a deadly game orchestrated by a mind twisted with dark intentions. This was the campground killer, and they were caught in his deadly game. The stories and warnings that had circulated among campers were not just urban legends, they were horrifyingly real. Mark fought back with the desperation of a man fighting for his life. Every instinct screamed at him to survive, to protect himself and those he cared about. He kicked out, connecting with something solid, but the attacker recovered quickly, slashing again with the knife. The relentless assault left Mark with little room to maneuver, each move a calculated risk. The blade caught Mark across the chest, tearing through his jacket and drawing blood. The pain was excruciating, but it also served to sharpen his focus, to remind him of the stakes. He gasped, pain lancing through him, but the adrenaline surging through his veins kept him on his feet. Each heartbeat echoed in his ears, a relentless drumbeat of survival. He heard Sarah scream from inside the tent, her voice filled with terror. The sound cut through the chaos, a stark reminder of what he was fighting for. The sound fueled his desperation. He couldn't let her fall victim to this monster. He had to find a way to turn the tide, to protect her at all costs. He had to protect her, had to find a way to survive this nightmare. The thought of losing her, of failing to keep her safe, was unbearable. The attacker pressed his advantage, forcing Mark back towards the looming darkness of the woods. Each step back felt like a step closer to doom, the shadows threatening to swallow him whole. Mark knew if he was dragged into the shadows, he wouldn't stand a chance. The forest was the killer's domain, a place where he could disappear and strike from the darkness. He had to even the odds, had to find a way to turn the tables. His mind raced, searching for anything that could give him an advantage, a way to outsmart his relentless foe. But the campground killer was relentless, his attacks fueled by a cold, calculating rage. Each move was precise. Each strike intended to break Mark's spirit and will to fight. In a desperate bid, Mark's hand closed around a fallen branch. It wasn't much, but it was something. He swung it with all his might, hoping to catch the killer off guard. The branch connected, momentarily staggering the attacker. It was a small victory, but it gave Mark a sliver of hope. He pressed the advantage, swinging again and again, each strike fueled by sheer determination. The fight raged on, a brutal dance of survival in the heart of the forest. Mark's muscles burned, his breath came in ragged gasps, but he refused to give up. He couldn't afford to. Slowly, he began to push the attacker back, each successful strike building his confidence. The killer's cold eyes flickered with something that might have been doubt, a crack in the facade of invincibility. Mark seized the moment, pouring every ounce of strength into his attacks. He had to survive. He had to protect Sarah. Failure was not an option. The final struggle was a blur of motion and pain, a desperate clash of wills in the darkness. But Mark's determination, his will to protect and survive, proved stronger. With a final, decisive blow, he brought the branch down, and the attacker crumpled to the ground. Mark stood over the fallen attacker, his chest heaving, his body trembling with exhaustion. He had done it. He had survived. But the night was far from over. He had to get back to Sarah to make sure she was safe. The nightmare wasn't over yet, but for now they had a fighting chance.